Good evening, everybody. I think we have given customary 5 Southern minutes to students to filter in. They will probably be coming in and maybe out because classes end at 6 o'clock. Some start at 7 o'clock. So welcome, everybody. I am Tanya Softic, Professor of Art, Printmaking in Department of Art and Art History. And before I introduce Teresa Cole, our speaker, I'm going to just thank a few people and organizations who have helped make this possible. I have known Teresa, we have calculated somewhere around quarter of the century. We have met actually in New Orleans during the Southern Graphics Council session of the Southeastern College Art Association Conference, and Teresa was in her very first semester of teaching at Tulane as a young assistant professor of printmaking, and I was maybe in my second year of teaching at Rollins College. So we go back quite a bit. And I've been planning to bring Teresa and her work to University of Richmond for a long time. And a number of people have made this possible. This is a collaboration between, my students are taking credit back there. So this is a collaboration between our university museums and Department of Art and Art History. And I would like to thank Richard Waller at the University Museums for being my partner in this. And of course, I would really like to thank our incredible staff at University of Museums. And it's such a pleasure when you have a visiting artist who's having a show here to tell them, don't worry, these people are pros of the pros. They're gonna install a great exhibit. You're in good hands. So I would also like to thank the following committees and departments that have helped with this event. Cultural Affairs Committee, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, International Education, in addition to University of Museums and Department of Art History have contributed funds toward this event. And now I'm going to turn to our speaker and briefly introduce her before I let you look at her incredible work. Please definitely join us at the opening in the gallery itself. You're going to be glowing yellow. Everybody's glowing yellow. It's the room that should stay the way it is throughout the winter, so we can all go for some saffron, wonderful light therapy. You'll see what I'm talking about. Don't miss it. So our guest, Teresa Cole, is New Orleans artist who is known nationally and internationally for her installation print work, created primarily in relief and serigraph. And this is one of the reasons I really wanted Teresa, the many wonderful printmakers, to visit, is because Teresa is one of those fantastic printmakers who takes her prints as a point of departure, to create something else, installations in particular. She's a scholar and creative interpreter of pattern as language of cultural distinction and hybridity. She examines the use of pattern to create identity as well as a means to distort, confuse, and manipulate information. Her works employ layering, enlarged marks, and magnified views to penetrate the malleability of sensory knowledge. Her interest in patterns took her around the world, and she was invited to create screen-printed murals and print installations at places like Heartground Printmakers in Cape Town, South Africa, Franz Masserel Graphic Center in Casterly, Belgium, and Koj Kolkata, West Bengal, in India. Teresa earned a BFA in Fiber from Maryland Institute of Creative Art in Baltimore and received much of her early printmaking education as a working member of Peacock Printmakers in Aberdeen, Scotland. Her MFA in printmaking is from the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Her works are in the collections of Rhode Island School of Design, the Art Gallery of New South Wales and Sydney, Australia, New Orleans Museum of Art, Art Museums of Estonia in Tallinn, and many other world institutions. She's a professor in the Newcomb Art Department at Tulane University, where she teaches all forms of printmaking. I ask you to join me in welcoming Teresa to U of R. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, for such a lovely introduction. And I'd also like to thank you and Richard Waller for inviting me to the University of Richmond and for making my installation possible. I also want to thank Henley and Steve of the museum staff for their patience with me throughout this process, and for all of you students who donated your time and made quick work of hanging so many parts. So thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So know that when you see the installation down at the museum, that there were quite a lot of students that helped with the process. It was really wonderful. All right. So through this talk, I would like to show the give and take, or rather the exchange of art making. How I research, collect, and find inspiration for works that translate and examine our complicated world. My art production is process-driven and based primarily in the area of printmaking, but my desire has always been to push the boundaries. So what you're looking at here is is a projection of ink on paper. And within printmaking, you have to work with the matrix. The matrix is carved or scratched into to create areas that hold ink and enable me to repeat the process over and over. Some of my plates are so large I actually have to sit on them in order to carve them. I usually work about 4 feet by 4 feet within these works. Although I'm often not interested in doing the same thing over and over, my goal is to utilize repetition to create a larger impact, or to create variation through the use of changing ink colors, printing selectively, as in this image here. And visually, this expands on the imagery and calls attention to difference. Here's a detail of a hand-carved piece, and you can see that there are aspects that, they're not perfectly carved. The hand is really an important part of this process. So artists don't work in a void, and imagery prevails in our world today. Yet often our surrounding environment is ignored. At times it takes a major change to become aware of what's around you. I live in New Orleans. It's a very ornamental city, and I hadn't actually thought about that until my world was totally disrupted by, a natural disaster and a failure of our government. Don't get me started on that. But anyway, Katrina, the Hurricane Katrina, was a catalyst for recognizing the influences of my environment. Also, stepping into another culture, removing myself from my comfort zone, heightens senses and brings them to the forefront. I have to do a slight little aside here. This is my print shop at Tulane University. I brag that I have the most beautiful classroom on campus. It's 2,000 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows and has great eastern light in the morning. And we have a fully funded MFA program, just for anybody that might be interested. So I'm interested in this idea of prints as environments, or even prints as theater. Oops. The goal for my large-scale print installations was first to transform space and then to distort perception. The utilization of illusionistic trompe-l'oeil to trick the viewer broadened out into a wanting to make powerful marks to consume the viewer's field of vision. Now the works are strongly determined by pattern and the multi-layering of ornament, heavily influenced by travels to India, Japan, and most recently Nepal. Early in my career, I was able to realize a large-scale room project where every inch of a gallery space was covered in etched metal. Entitled Charming the Snake, and first exhibited in 1996 at the Arthur Roger Gallery in New Orleans, the installation utilized screen-printed silhouettes incorporated from found sources, which depicted cultural standards of beauty, devices of fashion, as well as hybrid plant and animal forms. The silhouettes that were etched were highly polished, and then so that as the viewer walked through the space, they would see their own reflection within these etched silhouettes. So that ultimately it became this question between also the viewer and the viewed, because you would see your own reflection contextualized within these hybrid plant, animal, and human forms. So trying different materials also became truly important to me, and inspired by actually the stains from my screen prints was this particular work screen printed onto tarlatan, which is what's utilized to wipe etching plates. The experience of creating that vast piece cemented my desire also to work larger and more installation-based scale. And I've continued to do so for the last 25 years with various substrates, from paper, fabric, and then even working directly, screen printing directly onto walls. I think I have an extra space in there. Anyway. This one's not showing up, but sorry about that. Oh, anyway, so it's a little challenging to actually screen vertically onto the wall, but with a second pair of hands and actually old screen printing ink, it's possible. So unfortunately, the piece that for some reason doesn't seem to be showing up is a piece that I did at Lamar Dodd School of Art at the University of Georgia, and it's a permanent installation that was screen printed onto the walls there at their new university building. But I became seduced by pattern and ornamentation, and after much research realized that India would be an excellent source to uncover the origins of many patterns. This is an early woodcut piece, just printed silver on top of silver. But I wanted to sort of find out where a lot of these patterns were actually coming from. So my first travels to India was in the fall of 2008, and the green there on the map sort of marks my trail of Delhi to Jaipur to Calcutta, then to Gujarat in the west. An ornament is everywhere there. My reason for going was to research pattern in textiles, but I found it wasn't as accessible to me as all the patterning within the architecture. So this is actually a ceiling with broken mirrors crushed into the plaster, and kind of extraordinary patterning. But it's found everywhere, from palaces to sorry, some of my images are dropping out on me for some reason. This was an image of a floor tile, but not sure why. See, it shows up there, but come
Please hold.
Sorry.
When in doubt.
Okay. It took a long time.
Where are we meant to be?
This one. There. All right, excellent, thank you. All right. So from the palaces to just tile work on the floor. Ornament has always been a powerful tool of ethnic and cultural self-definition. Ornament can be a bridge between cultures and between elite and popular strains of the same culture. To grasp a culture's ornament from within or without is to grasp its heritage, its uniqueness, and its joy. This quote from James Thrilling and from his book, Ornament, A Modern Perspective, I think is so truly important to my own exploration within ornament. And, according to Thrilling, style is identity. And so, just discovering the identities of people and where we've come from, and so much of our own, our interest these days in, where our own DNA and where we actually hail from and our ancestors hail from becomes, I think, really interesting. So this almost becomes like the, my search for this DNA of pattern. And within India, even, the way fruit is stacked at the market, or these absolutely extraordinary carvings of a home in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad. So once considered frivolous, pattern can function to dismantle space, emphasize meaning, or explore repetition. These works often occupy a realm that floats between representation and abstraction. And you see this quite a lot within ornamentation in Indian buildings. Conversely, the imagery can provide tracings of past histories or mappings of time and place. This beautiful carvings in a palace in Jaipur. The detail of that. And this was heavily influenced by this next project of mine entitled Culture Clash 24/7. Inspired by the colors and shapes, the layering of histories, the local and the global, I created this work entitled Culture Clash 24/7 to describe and celebrate the fantastic frenetic experience of visiting India, made up of screen prints and overlaid with woodcuts that were then waxed, cut into shapes, each containing parts of a microcosm amassed on the wall. It becomes its own universe. Some details. So, pattern as narrative, or even narratives as pattern. I was told by an art historian in India that the stories are so well known that they become pattern. The patterns soak into the identity and the consciousness of a place. In the fall of 2007, while conducting a workshop at Rabindranath Bharati University in Calcutta, I was utilizing imagery that I had designed of mosquitoes, which had become for me a symbol of post-Katrina frustration. But interestingly enough, the students in Calcutta thought I was working with it. They saw it as a local image of their own. And it became a common symbolic language for both of us. We could both claim authorship, and it became a really wonderful link. So mosquitoes as this symbol of post-Katrina frustration, I started creating these centralized repeated images that loosely reference mandalas, or often even feel a little bit like Rorschach tests. The mandala is viewed as a plan, a chart, or a geometric pattern that represents the universe metaphysically or symbolically. And these works are actually created while I was in residence at Frans Mazuriel in Belgium. And I worked through several sort of narrative iterations with this same format of, mirroring and repeating. So these narratives function as both pattern and story. And I find it also a great format for exploring, issues, particularly like this piece that was inspired by Deepwater Horizon. I seem to live in a place that is prone to disasters, both natural and man-made, and this creates a skull, but it also includes Obama picking up tar balls from the beach at the very top, images from the newspaper that I was actually gleaning. Oil rig workers create the net here, men sweeping the beach. Actually, this is from the Exxon Valdez. And then some birds from the Gulf, like pelicans. I've also used this format to explore a project that I called the Bee Project, that is actually a series of 5 prints that are now in the collection of the University of Richmond museums, and was in a previous exhibition last month on the insects. And this particular series of works was meant to call attention to colony collapse disorder and a lot of the problems that we have with, lack of plant diversity that are causing issues of beehive collapsing. So learning to speak. So also thinking about this whole idea of ornament as language or language as ornament. And during my travels in India, I found myself, this was in the state of West Bengal, several hours north of Calcutta. Brishnapur is a village in West Bengal known for its ornate terracotta temples from the 17th century. Each is richly decorated with scenes of Lord Krishna's life, as well as episodes taken from the epic, the Ramayana. And this village has these incredible temples scattered all over them. It was really quite a stunning trip, and not a very totally off the tourist path. So it was really fantastic. So this also addresses the idea about the stories being so well known that they become pattern, and they cover and encrust these temples with these narratives. This is also a region known for its weaving, and the same patterns are found within the woven textiles. And, here's a detail of a sari, and it was really extraordinary to see these saris being woven. It's also other than the terracotta temples, they also do a lot of terracotta sculptures in this region. And we were visiting some potters in this village when I saw this sari hanging over the side of a building, just drying in the wind. Fabric stands out in the environment. There are times when I see things and they haunt me. This beautiful piece of fabric, off the side of this building, blowing in the wind, this just drying on someone's home. And this vision kept coming back to me, and I wanted to use it in a piece, but I wasn't totally sure how. I started doing some sketches, sometimes quickly notating things. It's just like getting that idea out of my head onto a piece of paper becomes so important. And quick thumbnails. I thought maybe I'd want a little fan blowing it. And so I had an opportunity in the fall of 2008 to turn my own studio space into an exhibition site. New Orleans has an international art biennale called Prospect, which I think Prospect 4 will open in about 3 weeks. And I received a grant from the Joan Mitchell Foundation in order to turn my space into an exhibition site. And so I moved everything out and started hanging this fabric that I dyed and embroidered from the rafters of my studio. So entitled Learning to Speak, I wanted to address the concept of ornament as language, and I wanted to stay true to the color of that original sari that I saw on the side of the building. And this piece is a desire to examine communication. So 14 lengths of dyed and embroidered fabric hung from the rafters of my studio. The space was turned into an alternative exhibition site, and the embroidery was some of the 34 official languages that are spoken in India, and instead of doing the whole entire alphabet, I just created the vowels. So English, obviously, some of them I also used Urdu, Bengali, Hindi, and then also created an ornamental alphabet. Again, interested in working with materials I know and normally use in a different context, the fabric in this particular piece is tarlatan, which is what's utilized to wipe etching plates. Each panel was hand embroidered and hand dyed. And this gives you a little bit of the sense of the height of the piece. A few more of the embroideries. The work even swayed with the currents in the room. So even though I didn't install the fan like I had originally thought I would in my sketch, there was enough movement in the space for the work to sway. In 2010, I was invited to be part of an exhibition curated by Dr. Paula Sengupta from Rabindranath Bharati University in Calcutta. The show, entitled Stains on My Chintz, included the work of 6 women who were from places that had a strong colonial history. 20 years in New Orleans have exposed me to the remnants and evidence of a colonial historic fabric. So over the years, I have amassed many ornamental images. I have stacks of plates that are probably like 5 feet deep, leaning against the walls in my studio. And I've carved them onto these images onto blocks and layered on top of each other like an improvisational jazz musician or a club DJ. I have been interested in the mashup that can be imposed by one pattern upon another when they are printed on top of each other, in combination, creating diverse forms. So combining that simple and complex, the macro and the micro. This is just actually a catalog of a few of my printed blocks. But this is what I carried, actually 400 of them, in my carry-on suitcase to Calcutta, India, for a residency at Coach and for this exhibition, Stains on My Chintz. The living room of my residency was my studio, and in a previous trip to India, I had been introduced to the work of folk painters who backed their scroll-like paintings with fabric. They utilized old saris as reinforcement for these paintings, and they would carry them from village to village, imparting narratives like film strips, and they would also often sing these narratives. So I thought this would be a fantastic way to sort of animate my prints by backing them with these old saris. Old saris were spread out onto the floor of the studio space. Adhesive was put on them, and then my prints were laid on top. The other thing that I found really fascinating when I had been conducting that workshop at Rabindranath Bharati University, the students actually wiped their etching plates with old sari. So I was like, oh no, this is too beautiful to use. I know, it was really, so these are actually sold in the market as rags. And, it was kind of, I'm like, we can't use this as rags. So this is what I backed my 400 prints with. They were then trimmed and curled so that each one had the prints on one side, and you could see this this tongue of fabric at the bottom. So inspired by this mechanism to support and animate a simple piece of paper, I backed these pieces and then hung them in this exhibition space at the Harrington Street Art Center in downtown Calcutta. And this is kind of interesting. The Harrington Street Art Center, which is a British colonial building, is right across from the American Embassy, and they both sit on Ho Chi Minh Saran. So the street is named after Ho Chi Minh, and there's the American Embassy and British colonialism on the other side. It's really fantastic. West Bengal had been actually up until very recently, had been a democratically elected communist state within India. So it's quite some interesting contrasts there. So the result of all these 400 pieces was an undulating mass of prints with little hints of the fabric showing like tongues at the bottom. And here you can see also this space that was so fantastic. It was this brand new renovation of this building, and the floors shine so much it makes the piece appear like it's three-dimensional, but it's really against the wall. Here are some details. I like hanging things in corners, and you'll see that in the gallery. The piece was originally installed against the wall, but I've installed it in several different spaces, and it has moved off the wall. The work has now become more sculptural, the paper and fabric acting together as both skin and structure. Oh, and another aspect is that I originally thought I was going to hang this piece with just little map pins in the wall. Well, because of this new renovation, they would not let me touch those walls. But they did have picture molding that ran across the top of the room, and so I thought, okay, well, I know Annette Messager hung all these photos with bits of string. I'll go find colored string and hang the work that way. So sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, and I think the piece becomes just so much richer because of it. And once it gets off the wall, then the string also becomes, much more of a player within the piece. This is the work installed at White Space Gallery in Atlanta, and then at the Detroit Artist Market in Detroit. Also, by taking it off the wall, the fabric became much stronger, and the colors are a bit more vibrant as well. And what becomes also so important about this piece is that it is an homage to my source material. Another work created in India is this piece, Columns of Nuisance, and you also showed this last month. This was made with the help of several master wood carvers and master sari printers. And I sent designs for the carving before I even left the States, and arrived with these beautiful blocks, as you can see on the right-hand side, carved of mosquitoes and moths. And then I spent several days in a sari printing factory with this gentleman who helped me realize my designs. And he was very happy when we were finished, I think. It was a little more complicated than most of their patterning is developed on a grid, and mine was a little more complicated than that. So it was, and I spoke no Bengali and he spoke no English, and so we did a lot of nodding and although, nodding is not always the same. but I had a fantastic time, and he did too. It was really a fantastic experience, and the people that Kanishka is the company, and they they do this traditional block printing, and it's really important that they're keeping this handicraft alive. So, the depth of surface. Natural texture and abstract texture, i.e. ornament, have a depth, not of space, but of surface. This is from this gentleman, Lars Sprijbroek, from his book, The Sympathy of Things, Ruskin and the Ecology of Design. And he argues for ornament and structure becoming one. He's, I believe, an architecture historian. And I see this happening with the act of paper making, because the surface is structure, and the patterns are not just applied, but structure as well. And while I was in India, I got to visit this stepwell outside of Ahmedabad with these incredible stone carvings. And I had this desire to see this sort of transformed into another material, and thought that paper making would be the proper medium. Here, just another quick sketch of what I was thinking about with some notations as well. And in the summer of 2012, I received a grant from Tulane University and was able to go and realize this work at the paper studio in New York City called Dudane. They were in the garment district up until very recently. They've just moved out to Brooklyn. So I haven't seen their new space yet, but this was amazing to work with these master paper makers and to realize these pieces. I created stencils that I hand X-Acto knifed out of mylar that were then laid down on wet pulp, and then colored pulp was added. Handmade paper is formed from pulped plant material, and it is seamless even when different layers are laid on top of one another. Each part is structurally integrated with the other, creating a fusion of colors, shapes, and materials. I also was introduced to translucent types of paper, like abaca in relationship to cotton, which was much more opaque, and that created some really interesting relationships also. Here you can see a colored pulp with a white pulp, and just the beautiful luminosity of the wet pulp. The title for this body of work, Seamless Belonging, metaphorically describes not only the process of papermaking, but also the issues of cultural identity that I have been examining with my work through pattern. This is a wash-away process where a piece of paper is made or pulp is actually laid on a screen, and then the stencil that I cut is laid on top, and then the negative areas are washed away with a hose. And so then the stencil's removed, and it's pressed onto another piece of paper that contrasts color-wise. Another piece being washed away. And then the final piece of paper there. And here you have just a nice sort of angle where it almost looks like fondant with the cotton on top of the abaca there. But once it's pressed, that physicality gets a little lost. some of the finished works. And the pulp is colored with pigment, and it's incredibly strong pigment that bleeds out a little bit. And so I think the unexpected pigment bleeding adds to the images as well. This is some of the work in an installation at Callan Contemporary Gallery in New Orleans. And from my previous piece, the curling work, someone had said, I would love like a meditative space to sit inside. And so I created this work entitled Mantra that hangs in the center of the space, and then the viewer is surrounded by these shapes. And each one of these shapes is a handmade piece of paper made in that particular shape. And as you can see, the piece becomes much more than the work itself. It gets expanded with the shadows that hit the wall. Actually, it shows a little better actually on the screen than that one. But. In August of 2014, I traveled to Japan to attend a workshop on washi being Japanese papermaking. And my inability with the language in Japan separated me from others. It isolated me in a world of pure sensation, mainly visual, but also taste, smell, and sound. The dripping of rain, the roar of cicadas, the tinkling of temple bells became my daily grammar. So the poetic, in contrast with the frenetic, these are some back streets in Osaka. This is the floor of the papermaking factory Awagami on the island of Shikoku, southwest of Osaka. Really incredible facility. So when I got there were 15 of us that were part of this workshop. Artists, lawyers, people from all over the world, Australia, Sweden. It was an interesting mix of people that were just interested in learning how to make Japanese paper. So we started with mulberry bark. These are strips that have already been taken off the trees. I think the trees need to be stripped in the winter, and then our first job was to remove the outer bark. So you removed the darker parts of the bark and ended up with the white sort of inner pulp of the bark. This took some time, and then it was cooked in an alkali solution, and then with wooden boards, we pounded it by hand into long, thin fibers. Now, what becomes important about mulberry is that it produces these long, thin fibers that enable you to be able to make very thin sheets of paper, but still incredibly strong. Unlike cotton, which is very short and can sort of break quite easily, the Japanese papers, which are very thin and translucent often, have this incredible strength, and it's one of the reasons why they're used in everything from screens to wall dividers. And it was really quite an amazing experience. My investigation of traditional handicrafts and the impeccable skill in which they were executed exposed me to a grammar of care, expertise, and perfection. The repetition of an activity until it is second nature, but never taken for granted, until it is expected yet novel each time. A meditation, a prayer, and a practice all at once. And these are the vats that we actually made the paper in. The pulp was suspended in a vat of water, and then I went to work learning the fine art of dipping, leveling, sifting the material on the screen to create an even consistent sheet of paper. This process and practice and refinement with an emphasis on detail required complete focus, total absorption, and slow engagement. I was able to create about 20 sheets of paper from that little pile you saw in the blue basket there at this workshop. Although I haven't touched that paper, it's like so precious. I brought it back with me. And a really important aside that came out of this was one evening, they kept us quite busy at this workshop, and one evening the owner of the factory's wife showed us how to fold and dye paper. So this tradition of folding and dyeing is called itamje me. Can you help me out there? Do you know? No? Okay. It's a form of shibori. It refers to this idea of snowflakes. So I was fascinated with this diversity of mark making that could occur by just changing the way something was folded. And because of the folds, a natural repeat was created as well. The technique in Japanese refers to snowflakes since no two patterns are exactly the same. With my ongoing investigation of pattern, this led to a new installation piece that I made upon returning to the States entitled Seep. Over 60 sheets of Japanese paper, not the ones I made, right, were folded, dyed, and attached to bamboo sticks in order to create a wall relief that utilized the paper in both a decorative as well as structural manner. So this is just my my catalog of paper before they got transformed into three-dimensional shapes. So the act of folding and dyeing, and then unfolding and revealing the same yet different stains each time, providing an element of chance on how the dye absorbs with variation, the difference in depth in which you're dipping that folded paper creates this exciting new piece each time. This is the backing of each one with bamboo, and then my obsession with repeating this process and with wanting to see the diversity spread out in front of me leads to this installation entitled Seep. It is an examination in the similar as well as the different. The surprise and the familiar guide your eye through the composition on the wall, both dizzying and peaceful. Seep is a work about simplicity and subtlety, examining the concept of repetition as an idea of refinement. The title refers to the verb, the act of the dye soaking and being absorbed by the paper. There is a bit of chance, and that takes place with each one. Yet, the more it's repeated, the more controlled and refined it can become. Within this piece, I actually printed the sheets of paper first in a white relief ink, and then went back and folded and dyed them so that the ink actually acted as a resist to the dye in some places. The concept of seeping also refers to how the effect of an exposure to another culture can infiltrate and seep into one's consciousness. That often it can be subtle, yet truly effective, like dye permeating a surface. The use of blue dyes to color the paper references blue indigo, often used in traditional Japanese textiles, and it has a sublime quality that speaks of both earth and sky. A few other explorations along the lines of Seep that play patterns off of each other, as well as utilize formal wall compositions, such as this work, Saturate, and this work just came back from Canada, the International Print Biennale in Trois Rivers. Here's a detail, and you can see here, this one I printed with silver ink, and it actually really resisted, and you can see how the dye starts to sometimes soak through the open lines of the paper. And then this particular work entitled Infusion. So as a printmaker, I make a lot of prints that actually, well, suck, let's face it. Or they're not good impressions, they're maybe a little light, I didn't get things inked evenly. So, and especially when I'm working very large, it's like, oh, this is a big sheet of paper, I'm not about to throw it away. So I started printing on top of them. So I keep everything. Also, I think as artists, we're sort of hoarders as well. So, and I just continue to print on top. So I started working on this series that I titled Rejects. This really expands on that idea of improvisation, as well as something that I've recently discovered called entanglements. So if the machines of modernism were meant to cleanse and purify, our machines, our contemporary machines, will bastardize and hybridize. So according to Spybrook, digital technologies shift from the uniform to the variant. He even argues that these new technologies are taking us back to craft, which I find absolutely fascinating. One could see this within the concept of, say, a maker's space, where you design and then print, say, from a 3D printer or a laser cutter or a CNC router. And in the future, hopefully, these spaces will be at Home Depots, and there won't be a need for 1,000. One can design and print one, or a small edition. Say you might even be designing the hinge, designing from scratch the hinges to your doors for your house. He says, and I quote, "Things should be jungles, overgrown by relation, woven, frayed, nested, and entangled," end quote. So these become my rejects, these layers of patterns on top of each other. Everything that I've carved to work that has been CNC routed. About 3 years ago, the art department at Tulane procured a CNC router and then just recently a laser cutter, and I began working with this new technology. The reduction of mark making by our technological tools truly does translate the marks through scanning, manipulating in Photoshop, live trace in Illustrator, and then outputting to a CAM program that reads X, Y, and Z coordinates. The marks become slang or a dialect, foreign to my typical hand-carved mark making, yet not unlike what printmaking has always done. In fact, the etcher Stanley William Hayter, mid-20th century printmaker who ran a famous print atelier, Atelier 17 in Paris, called printmaking the journalism of a line. So this becomes even like a further mediation of that. Now with these new technologies, we are making bastardized and hybridized marks that entangle and bring us back to the unique. And I'm even utilizing others' detritus left in the wood shop. So people have cut things out. There are marks left on the board underneath, and I'm down there scavenging all the time to layer them on top of each other. So this new series of rejections investigates the layering of a multitude of surfaces, from hand-carved wood blocks to CNC-routed detritus. The unique prints become evidence of years of work, like a drop cloth from a fabric printing factory. And so patterns from 5 or 6 years ago may appear. Originally considered imperfect impressions, these sheets of paper are printed on so many times that the layers of ink begin to reject, revealing the previous layer. So what happens is when you continue to print ink on top of ink, it just doesn't want to stick anymore. So there's this actual physical rejection as well as a discardment as the idea of reject. Here's an earlier state of a piece, a later version. I often don't know when these are finished, and I might think they are and come back and look at them 6 months later and pull them out and think, oh, this new plate that I've just made or found would be perfect on top of that. The other thing that I've discovered with the CNC routed is this is a woodcut, but I have printed it in Talio. So I've printed it as if it were an etching. It takes about a can of ink to do this piece because it's 42 by 48. And the CNC router actually does dig in pretty deep. Oops. We've got another one that's not showing up. I don't know why. Let's see if I can do it that way. Anyway, that's a detail. So where the images are too deep from the carving, the paper isn't actually able to pull, to get down into the crevices and pull the ink out. And it creates these starved lines that add tension and highlight to the image. So there's certain areas where it would be, a dark line, but it becomes this sort of ghost of a line, or a starved line, where there's a little ink on the edge, but not so much in the middle. And I think that tension and contrast sort of makes this more interesting than if it were a totally perfect image. Last fall, I continued this process with the students from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. So for 5 days, with 10 plates, 30 sheets of paper, 5 days, 10 plates and 30 sheets of paper, we created 30 unique prints layered on top of it. And each has about 3 layers on top of it. And these are just some of the prints that were created while I was there. Here's a detail of one and an image of another. New explorations are in new materials, such as felt. This work, entitled The Phenomenology of Pattern, utilizes actually printing felts that one would utilize on a printing press. Here, these images are installed in an exhibition in Atlanta this past spring. So using these laser-cut print images, so it's the whole idea of you just press print to print it with the laser cutter. It's kind of fantastic. And I worked with some we have a makerspace that's run by engineering students at Tulane, and these kids were so excited to work with me and cut. They hadn't worked in felt before, so they were finding the perfect, power and speed in order to cut the piece out. So, which brings us to the current show, Saffron. In April of 2015, I was trekking in the Mustang region of western Nepal when an earthquake of great magnitude hit. The country was devastated and over 8,000 people lost their lives. I was touched by the strength and the kindness of the Nepalese people, and my goal for the piece that is in the museum is to create a work that commemorates their loss and is meant to be a memorial. Each piece is individual and uniquely made by folding and dyeing and printing. This is actually at each pass, at each that you reach, there's usually flags and scarves that are placed in the environment. It's kind of an extraordinary raw environment I was trekking on the rain shadow side of Annapurna 3 mountain range, and the people that live in this region get around by pony. There are some jeeps, but there are no roads. They are just pony trails. Also incredible geology. Like, this is a great place if you're really interested in the plate tectonics. You can literally see it. It's really quite unbelievable. Each little village had their own monastery. This is the entrance to a monastery, and then also there's this, extraordinary fabric that, here I've got this fabric going again, but blows in the. This is a video, but it's. How did we get it to work? Oh, oops, I guess it started itself.
Sorry, we've broken PowerPoint.
Must mean it's time to quit.
This is what it does.
Yeah, but technology's always been like this. I remember when I was in graduate school, when people were showing slides, there would always be like a slide that wouldn't fall, or so it hasn't gotten any better. It's just different. So these incredible vestibules with this yellow fabric and the sounds of the monks. I wasn't allowed to photograph within the monasteries themselves, but just inside the vestibules we could. So all the pieces of paper that you will see hanging in the gallery first started like this. This is how they're all folded and then dyed. These are some of the patterns that are screen printed on them just as cut pieces of paper. I had them actually laser cut on wood, then printed. They're actually screen printed onto the sheets, but I wanted it to look like wood. Screen printing that many was going to take too long. Woodblock printing was going to take too long, so that's why I opted to shift to screen printing. And then this. And then each shape is laser cut. So this is the laser cutter. And I could print 4 up. I'm trying to maximize my paper as well. A stack of 1,600 sheets of paper. And then this is what you'll see down in this space. The second piece that's down there, I actually don't have a photo of, but I'm showing some resource material for it. These are carved railings of windows in the Nawari region of Nepal, and I was just fascinated by, this is in Bhaktapur, but fascinated by the diversity of these, my next one's and then they were translated and cut out to be screen printed. So this is the wood being cut, and you can see these vectored lines. Just it looks like it goes really fast. It still took me 6 hours to get this cut. And the way it's hung, it references these incredibly beautiful prayer wheels, which actually was kind of a nice surprise. So you'll see that before you enter the room with the yellow flags. Okay. Oops. I have one more thing to say. According to James Thrilling, ornament frequently occupies a shadowy area between representation and abstract form. Pattern and ornament were often demonized in the 20th century. Individuals such as the Austro-Hungarian architect Adolf Loos even called ornament a crime. As an artist who acknowledges the complex layering of our world, I don't want to marginalize these elements. I'm sorry, I can't get all my, okay. I've lost my place now. I don't want to marginalize these elements. It is a goal to not only show the diversity of what is possible with pattern on a visual level, but also to expand on the conceptual possibilities and bring pattern and ornament to the forefront of contemporary discourse. And if I have to bastardize and hybridize to do so, I will. Thank you.
Okay, she's available for all of your questions down in the museum and in her exhibition, and it's wonderful to have you here. And but we need to go see the exhibitions.